Okay, hello, Dr. Uma Naidu. Thank you so much for coming on today and discussing a topic that is very relevant right now, especially.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate the invitation. It's cool to speak to you.
Yeah. So this was actually a topic that was a large fuel for why I became a dietitian, and so it's something to see the conversation continuing, and this idea of food as medicine is really exciting to just see it emerging in the field, and people like you who are pioneering these movements. So I appreciate the work that you're doing and really
Thank you.
respect it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So before we dive in, I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of your background, especially the exposure that you've had to this idea of, nutrition and its integration with psychiatry, and maybe
Mhm.
your experience there.
Sure. So, it comes from a deep-seated love for food, nutrition, and the meaning of food in my life. I think that really stems from my Hindu background and coming from a large family where food was important, but so was medicine, because in my family there are a large number of allopathic medical doctors, but also a few Ayurvedic practitioners. So that sort of holistic mind-body approach was just part of my DNA growing up. And when I started to study psychiatry, what I found was, I was very interested in the medications. I'd already learned pharmacology at medical school, but I began to realize that there were so many side effects to potentially life-saving medications that I was giving and starting to prescribe to patients, and that I felt there needed to be more that I had to offer. And I began to explore that and find the connections and read more and look at the current research. And that really that sort of grew in my own interests, and I really largely followed things that I loved to do. I loved psychiatry, I still do, and at the same time, I felt there needed to be more. So, my trip to culinary school, my studying of nutrition, all of that just came with real interest, wanting to be able to really know that individuals who were suffering with mental issues, even if they were not severely ill, whatever the degree of condition or diagnosis, or even just symptoms that they were having, that they needed to have more tools in their toolbox. And that passion really continued to grow. And when I was fortunate to have a conversation with the supervisor who helped me put these ideas together of all the different things I was doing. Because as I've said a few times when I've spoken about this, I wish I could say I had this grand plan and I knew from the age of 5 that I wanted to do this, but actually at the age of 5, for some reason, despite being surrounded by doctors, I wanted to be an astronaut. And then, for some reason, I think I was just fascinated with space travel. And then it sort of changed a little bit. And I really started to love all aspects of science and medicine. So I think the message being that when you do things that you love, the hope is that you can bring it together to, for some sort of purpose in life.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And your story with your battle with cancer and how that experience was for you was really interesting to read, and must have been an incredibly challenge of resilience, and hearing how you had to kind of be the patient in that situation, and kind of think of what that
Yeah.
would look like. That was really fun to read.
Thank you. It's interesting. If it's one, I learned so much from that experience. And although people do say that after they've endured such an illness, I think that my learning was on a few different levels. One was being a patient and not having in during that time any power over the prescription pad, which was a very different role, and when I had to come to accept that. Of course, I had long conversations with my doctors, and I had a wonderful team, but it really makes you understand how someone in the opposite role feels, and that was powerful for me. But also that because I had this holistic, integrated, functional theme and model of treatment, that I could bring that to my own care, um, in terms of how I handle things and how I manage my own emotions. So
Mm.
that was helpful.
Wonderful. Well, it was very inspiring, which I
Thank
think
you.
before we even get into even more is just to mention your book, which has recently come out. It was this year, is that correct?
That's right, August 4th,
August 4th. This
during
is
the pandemic.
yeah, and perfect timing, that's it's I think for everybody right now, we're all struggling with some level of, mental health challenge, and this
Yeah.
is a great time to be thinking about the things that we can control and the things that, could really benefit our mental health from many
Yeah.
different perspectives.
Absolutely. And food is definitely food. Nutrition, as you well know, Erin, are things that we can control,
Mhm.
within our reach, within our decision-making tree every single day. So,
Mm. It's very empowering. I think when I speak to clients about the impact that it can have, they get excited, a lot of the times, because often if they start taking a medication, for instance, and they might say, well, I don't feel like this completely cured my illness or whatever it was that their ailment that they were struggling with, and to tell them that they have these tools in their toolbox that are involving the food that they put on their plate or certain supplements. I don't know about you, but the clients that I speak with, they find that to be very empowering.
yeah, my practice in nutritional psychiatry, has made me feel that it offers people, a greater number of options to improve their mental well-being. And when people realize the number of things that they can do, the foods to embrace, the foods to avoid, like I go through in my book, over the years that I've done it, it has felt, as though it was giving power back to the patient. And I
Mm,
think that's an important thing these days, where there's so many things we can't control.
mhm,
And I feel that that is right now the hope that I feel the book can bring people.
mm,
That while we had this initial very difficult phase of the pandemic, and there's certainly ongoing difficulties with uncertainty, um, we are now at a point where we can make a decision to take better care of ourselves,
mm,
and to maybe reset a little bit, so that for whatever is to come, we can fortify our mental health. And one way to do that is through food.
mm. I love that. That is, if that were the end of the podcast, I would say that would be a really good place to end. But we've got some wonderful things ahead. So I'd love to kind of talk about the link in, so your chapter 1, you talk about the connection between our gut and our mental health and how they are directly intertwined. So I'd love to kind of have you elaborate a little bit more about how people who have mental illness are maybe more susceptible to gut issues, especially things like IBS, or just in general, kind of what this
Mhm.
connection is between the gut and the brain.
Sure. Many people don't associate the two organs, even if they know about the microbiome, because the gut and the brain are not close by, but they do originate from the exact same cells in the embryo. And when people understand that they arose from the same cells and then formed different organs, it starts to build an understanding. So that's the one thing that I think is very key. The other is that the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve, connects both organs. And I've, started to really call it this two-way superhighway, of bidirectional flow of information between the gut and the brain, and the brain and the gut. And then the two other facts I think are helpful for people to know are that more than 90% of the actual serotonin receptors are in the gut, and serotonin being the happiness hormone, and what we're trying to target with SSRI medications like Prozac and Zoloft and so many others. But also, speaking to our current times, a very large component of our immune system is in the gut.
Mm,
So it really, really makes a difference how we eat, because we, in fact, are not just eating for our mental well-being, our physical well-being, we're also eating now for our immunity.
mm. Yes, very relevant right now. And again, another tool that people can have in their toolbox amongst a lot of fear and uncertainty with, you know, the pandemic
Hmm.
and even just coming into
Yeah.
flu season, or when you think about autoimmune conditions,
Yeah.
you know, even if we're thinking further down the line, that yes, our immune system is something that it's not quite a very sexy term. It is this year, right? Because, you know, it's a
Yeah.
very extreme situation, but, you know, often
Yeah.
people don't typically associate that. Thank you.
That's true.
So, what are some of the best foods to eat if someone is struggling with anxiety and depression? And I don't expect you to just kind of go through a full list. We can kind of talk through a few of maybe the most important ones.
Sure.
At the end of the day, the best
Sure.
thing is to go read your book. You do an excellent job at pulling apart the research and breaking it down for people, not only how to incorporate these things into the diet, but, you know, how to make them tasty too.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Erin. So, I think it's true. There are lots of lists in the book. Each chapter has a list, and then the final chapter, the recipes and more lists. And the recipes really are intended to match the different chapters, but be interchangeable for people. They're
Mm,
also meant to be super user friendly, easy to implement, and also interchangeable. So if someone's vegan, they can replace, the salmon with a cauliflower steak. It's meant to be user friendly in that way as well. But essentially, if you're thinking about how could I eat to improve just my mood and to really lower my anxiety, one food off the top is really omega-3 fatty acids. Now you've
mhm,
heard that before. I like to suggest omega-3 rich fatty fish, or if someone doesn't consume seafood, then the short chain ALA from things like chia seeds, basil seeds, flax seeds, sea algae, sea vegetables, those types of foods. So I think that that's a good starting point, because incorporating good sources of salmon, if you can, into your diet a few times a week, or the plant-based options is a good first step, because omega-3 has actually been studied in both depression and anxiety. It used to be thought that they just targeted depression, but actually some human trials have shown that they help anxiety as well. So incorporating that is just an easy first step. Then, for anxiety, the foods that I feel have some good evidence, and there are many more in the book, um, are things like turmeric with a pinch of black pepper. Just adding that, whether you cook with it or not. If you don't cook with it, adding to a tea, a soup, or a smoothie is a good way to start. Always add the black pepper to make it much more bioactive. So if you're using turmeric for anything, always add a pinch of black pepper, because that makes it bioavailable and so much better for you. And then, I think that vitamin D rich foods are super helpful. And, for anxiety and in terms of mood, you want to think about some building blocks. So some building blocks include things like prebiotics and probiotics,
mhm,
because when you think about the impact on the gut, the prebiotic foods really bring back fiber rich nutrients to the microbiome and the microbes in the gut.
mm,
And the probiotics can be a supplement, but fermented foods will do the same. They'll bring back really good bacteria to the gut microbiome and help you out that way. So, fermented foods that are things like kombucha, miso, tempeh, sauerkraut, kefir, all of those. Things like yogurt and kefir, I always suggest the unfruited style, even though, say, blueberries on their own are really super healthy, antioxidant rich food. When they are in a yogurt, the added sugars that are added to the yogurt just kind of take away the health benefit.
mm,
So just get the plain yogurt or plain kefir, add your berries, and cinnamon for sweetening is usually my tip. And then one thing that many people overlook, but actually plays a very important part in building a pillar for mental health, are simple things like leafy greens, your vegetables, and your fruit servings.
mm,
Because what those do, bring back the color. When we say eat the rainbow, the color and the diversity of the rich polyphenols in these fruit and vegetables. For fruit, I like to suggest lower glycemic fruit, because sometimes individuals who are prescribed mental medications for mental health may have gained some weight,
Mm,
or if they're struggling with their mood, they might have gained or lost weight, depending. So I think that's just helpful for people to know. And the different colors of the fruit and vegetables and the leafy greens bring back a great biodiversity to the gut microbiome, and that's important. So it's no longer, rolling your eyes because your doctor or your nutritionist tells you to, eat your salads and to include your vegetables. There's actually some good evidence behind that now. And those are some really just simple things to start doing right now today. And that being said, I think that there are many more specifics as you alluded to in the book itself.
mm, excellent. Yeah, and what are your thoughts on, so from the omega-3 standpoint, so the conversion of the EPA and the DHA, the ALA form, so the plant form to the EPA and the DHA, do you find that that is, would you suggest that someone would take a supplement in that case because of that inefficiency of the conversion, or what are your thoughts on that?
So, some of the research shows that the conversion of the ALA is actually helped by curcumin and turmeric.
Oh,
So
really?
what I suggest to people, yes. So what I suggest to people is that that conversion is made more efficient by turmeric. And so, for example, in a chia pudding, add some turmeric. You're not really going to taste it, and it's not a bad taste. Maybe some people may not like it, but you're adding just a little bit. So I say, if you're making a chia pudding, if you using any of those plant-based sauces, try to add in turmeric, and that will actually at least help the efficiency. Outside of that, of course, a vegan supplement for omega-3s, if you don't consume seafood, is also an option, and they're easily available. But I like to first start with food sources, and with the addition of turmeric, it's doing good things to your body anyway. So why not add it in? And don't
Wonderful.
forget the black pepper.
Yeah. Now the vitamin D too, I think this is a really interesting one because you mentioned how it's so important with mental health, and in the research they show that about 80% of people who have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome or gut issues, also have vitamin D deficiency. And
Hmm.
we'll say, is it the chicken or the egg? And of course, everything's all connected, so we can't necessarily say which came first,
Hmm.
but it just comes back to the point of the importance of making sure that you get your levels tested. I have clients who
Right.
spend, plenty of time out in the sun. They're training for marathons. Their
Hmm.
Sundays are 12 miles in the sun, and they are still vitamin D deficient. And that's
Hmm.
why I always recommend that people get tested before just, assuming that just because they spend time outside that they're
Right.
getting enough vitamin D.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's, testing is always super helpful when we're trying to replenish certain vitamins, and certainly in the far northeast, vitamin D is deficient in many people. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing to be testing. And since we were just talking about certain vegan or plant-based supplements, then if someone's not consuming meat, then one of the things they want to be cautious about is vitamin B12, and that's a
Mm.
level they should get checked,
Yeah,
because there are
absolutely.
definitely mental health and neurological symptoms associated with vitamin B12 deficiencies.
Mm. Excellent. And then you mentioned the probiotic and prebiotic rich foods. I had a question the other day about, what if somebody's really picky and they don't like things like sauerkraut or
Mhm,
kimchi? And my suggestion
mhm.
was, I think kefir and yogurt can be great. And you have some recipes in the book. Are there any favorites that
Yeah.
you have of ways to incorporate those prebiotic and probiotic rich foods?
Yeah, I like the fact that in Indian cooking, yogurt is actually often used in certain dishes to help build marinades
Mm.
and to actually tenderize certain foods. And I think that if you're going in a savory direction, that's one way to think about it. Can you add a little bit to a marinade that you're making? So one that comes to my mind is a recipe for chicken tikka masala. If you do eat chicken, but you can also do the same recipe with a plant-based option like tofu or cauliflower florets. But it's a great way to incorporate that together with spices. So I like that. And I also like, adding the creaminess of kefir, if you like the flavor, to the idea of a salad dressing, because it
Mm,
can actually substitute for the creaminess in a salad dressing. When you add the right spices, it can be quite delicious. I mean,
mm,
on its own, it has that slightly soured flavor from
mhm.
the fermentation, but you can always buff it up with spices.
I love that. And I loved one of the reoccurring themes in your book about, you don't focus on, completely changing your lifestyle in a way where, you mentioned even a few instances with clients that you've had where, you've asked them to incorporate certain foods or highlighted foods that could be potentially working against their mental health. And rather than doing this dramatic lifestyle change, especially if it's something that's part of your culture, you suggest doing things in moderation or pairing them with these foods that offer really great benefits. And an example that I just thought of when you had there was, my boyfriend and I were making wings one day for a football game.
Hmm.
And I suggested to him, why don't we try making our own ranch dip with some yogurt and,
Hmm.
had some fun with it. And he did it and he really enjoyed it. So that just came to mind when
Yeah.
you mentioned that, because I loved your
Yeah.
approach on what can we add versus focusing so much on the restriction side of things.
Yeah, I absolutely. Nutritional psychiatry, what I find is that people, whether they have they have really difficult symptoms or just some symptoms, but they're struggling towards a better feeling of mental well-being, um, they people don't really want to hear just from the concept of behavioral psychology. You don't want to hear don't do this and leave that out. It feels like your life is going to be more constricted, and if you're not feeling great, you it's harder to hear things like that. It's much easier to say, hey, have more yogurt, build in more vegetable dishes, have these lean proteins. These are the dishes you can make, these are the switches you can make. You can still have dessert, but here's how, and here's what I suggest. But also, after they have a bounty of foods to choose from, and they feel like they're not going to be restricted and eliminating foods unless there's a specific condition for which a certain nutrient or ingredient has been linked to driving the symptoms in the wrong way, they feel much better. And then they want to start making those changes.
Mm,
And it's often then easier to see or hear that, there are some things you need to avoid, like artificial sweeteners can drive anxiety. So those are things you need to be careful about, even if you're trying to cut back on sugar. Going towards the diet soda may not be helping you in that instance if
mm,
you're trying to help your anxiety.
yeah. And being in the field of nutrition as a dietitian, there can be a large focus on the physical aspects of eating well, and that's something that I always come across. But what I love to hear from clients, and typically the clients that I work with, the focus is on more so gut health and symptoms and just improving overall their well-being. And my favorite thing is when they come to me and say, I just feel better. I feel better mentally, and even if the goal
Right.
is weight loss, or if the goal is, something very physical, then if we can shift that to focusing on feeling really good, because if you are trying to change your physical body, if you're coming from a place of solely looking a certain way versus how your body's feeling and getting that feedback from your body, then it can really detriment your project progress, because it's
Mhm.
fueling your body in a way to make it feel good mentally, physically, and all systems of the body should be feeling really good.
Absolutely. People are always talking to their doctors or their dietitians about, family history of diabetes or being overweight or wanting to lose a few pounds or, you know, high cholesterol. But we're not bringing the most important organ of our bodies into the room, because without the brain, the rest of our bodies do not function.
Mm,
So I think it's important to bring that conversation into the room and then understand the simple steps we can take to include the brain in that conversation and therefore include our mental well-being in the conversation as well. Because you can have a great blood sugar and hemoglobin A1C and still be feeling emotionally horrible.
mm.
So I think this is important.
Yeah, and we have plenty of research to support the detriments of stress on the body too. So things might
Absolutely.
look really good now, and that could be the case, but stress can be a very powerful thing.
Absolutely. And I think speaking to the pandemic, the American Psychiatric Association did a survey early on in the pandemic, and of the many things they looked at and found, the thing that troubled people the most was the uncertainty.
Mm,
And when we bring ourselves to, so many months later, and that uncertainty is continuing, what it speaks to is the underlying chronic stress that everyone's experiencing.
mm,
Because we may be functioning, working from home, doing our different activities, but it doesn't mean that our minds and bodies are not being stressed by the current situation we're in.
mm.
So, as well as election stress, political discussions, a lot of that is just creating a lot of stress for people in the environment and therefore in their bodies. So, I consider stress to be a vital sign. And I think it's one of the things we need to be paying great attention to because it's such a big driver of disease, inflammation, insulin resistance, and all of that.
Mm. In your book, you had mentioned, kind of your cultural practice of meditation. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And is
I
that
think I,
something that you implement
yeah.
with your clients?
So I grew up meditating culturally, and what I try to share with people is that it's not doesn't have to be based on a spiritual practice. It can actually be a mindful practice. So if they're open to it and they're willing to try even relaxation exercises, the power of a deep breath, different elements of breath yoga, which actually have been studied and now are showing not only cardiovascular benefits, but benefits in anxiety and depression. So even implementing small exercises like that in bite-sized nuggets where they can take something, practice it, and incorporate it on a daily basis makes a difference, and then build from there. Not at all unlike how I discuss the diets. It's I shouldn't say diet because I don't like the word, but to discuss the food plans. It's really building blocks. It's you can't change everything in a day.
Mm.
So what are the things that you can change right now today that you feel comfortable doing, and that most importantly you can easily implement. There's no point in taking a personalized plan from me with 25 different things to do and you can't do one of them. You've got to be able to feel that you can get behind yourself on at least one or two.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think meditation can be very daunting to think about when people have this vision of it being, a 20-minute practice out of their day. And I think it's
Mhm.
important that meditation looks different for everybody. And as you mentioned, there's
That's
many
right.
different forms of meditation. And for me, sometimes it's between clients, just taking a deep breath, closing my eyes, putting my
Hmm.
hand on my stomach, feeling that's typically where I hold a lot of my stress, and just
Hmm.
checking in with my body really is what I'm doing when I do that, is
Hmm.
just to see, where am I holding stress? Can I just close my eyes for a second and not be stimulated by everything that's going on? And if
Hmm.
people can maybe take those steps to not see it as, an all or nothing type of situation where it has to be 20 minutes of your
Exactly.
day, then it could be really
And break it down. I appreciate what you said because I like to chunk things down for people, whether it's their nutrition or the aspects of their mental well-being or the mindfulness practices. The same thing with movement. If someone is very, very depressed, they may not be able to do a certain exercise plan. So I'll
tough.
speak to them about movement. And can you get the newspaper today? Can you take your dog for a walk? Can you go to your local coffee store and is it close enough that you can walk and get a cup of tea or coffee? Is there something that can change a little bit today that you are able to do? Because you have to meet someone where they're at. So
Mm,
saying to someone, meditate 3 times a day for 20 minutes is daunting, but if you say exactly like you did, take a deep breath when you feel anxious, the power of a deep breath, or this is how you can work your way through a small mindfulness exercise. The fact that I'm Hindu as well, I frame it in a particular way because although I grew up with a certain background, it isn't the same for everyone. And mindfulness is just such a huge component of medicine these days that, I think it's just something that any one of us can be doing a little bit more of.
yeah. And for somebody who has an all or nothing mentality, myself included, I think it's important to know that, as you mentioned with physical activity, it doesn't have to be a 30-minute intense workout or an hour in the gym. It could be as simple as you mentioned, chunking it out and finding ways to incorporate it that are realistic. And they make such a big difference, but it's hard to
Yeah.
sometimes believe that when you think that the ideal situation looks like an all or nothing type of scenario.
hmm And I think with mood symptoms, it sometimes is difficult to envision yourself doing something in a day when you don't have the energy or
Hmm.
the motivation. So chunking it down for individuals who are feeling having or experiencing a low mood becomes important too. And just building it up incrementally, because obviously I'd like them to do more, but building it up incrementally really makes it achievable. And when someone feels mastery over even 5 minutes of a breath exercise or 5 minutes of movement, or yoga or stretches, something that gets them into a different mindset, then they can build up more from there.
I love that. And I love how you also stress a lot of that throughout the book. I really appreciated that.
Thank you.
Now, I had a question. I was really curious about this and actually had a note written down because I wanted to talk to you about it. I used to teach nutrition to adults with mental health issues, and one of their questions to me was, some of these psychiatric medications, the mechanism behind them kind of leading to weight gain. They were very frustrated and they said, is it impossible for me to lose weight if I'm on a medication that is scientifically going to basically change the way that I store fat or the way that my blood sugar is managed? And I went home. I remember going home that night and doing a lot of research on it. And, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but what I found was that, lifestyle changes can definitely still help, even if those medications are working against you. But what would your response to that be if somebody was worried about the weight gain and the medications?
Sure. So, an important part of that discussion is a discussion with their doctor about the medication itself, what they're taking, the side effects, and what are those lifestyle changes that they can start making if they aren't implementing them. Start implementing at the time of even considering a medication or needing it. The discussion of the risk benefit ratio in a more severe illness may warrant a medication, and I think it's very important and has been life-saving for many of my patients. But giving them the tools right there to start to implement exercise and things that they may be doing, but even upping their game in terms of what they're doing with how they eat. There's certainly some information in the chapters on the major mental illness towards the end of the book, where I am not at all, I don't necessarily feel in those instances it's diet or a medication. I think it's learning to eat healthily with whatever medication you need to take.
Hmm.
And I feel like it's particularly important in those illnesses where you can get very severely sick and even at times need to be in a hospital or may be acutely suicidal or have mania or lose touch with reality. So in instances like that, it's really not an either or. It's how can I live through this and live better and healthier. So getting individuals into good lifestyle, which is right there and then is important. Having and making sure that they're communicating with their doctor about blood tests that they need, checking their different profiles as they go through treatment, is something that we routinely do. So I think that becomes important as well. And then sharing with them, the what we know from the studies and the evidence of the different tweaks that they can make to their diet become important as well. So I think it really begins with that discussion and providing them the information.
That the point that you made about communication is so important, right? With your any provider that you're working with. I have a lot of clients who become very frustrated with the medical system, and I can understand their frustration at times. But I think part of it is we have to advocate, to some extent, and to share symptoms and concerns and ask questions. And sometimes it's tough to know what questions to ask or what kind of symptoms to share. But I think creating a really good relationship with your provider it seems like that would be really beneficial in pretty much any case.
Yeah, and I think it depends on both parties, The provider themselves has to be open to the discussion and have enough time. I mean, we're very, very pressed in terms of the times of time we have for our visits. But that being said, I think when someone's asking legitimate questions, we really have to be able to provide some information. And if, there is a real gap in nutrition at medical school. So I really can't blame my colleagues for sometimes not knowing the answers immediately. But they've studied so much science in medical school and so many different aspects of science that they can at least lead a person to some information or create a consult with someone who can provide the information too. So it's about opening that door to the conversation. It's
Mm.
starting there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what dietitians are for too, right? Is
It's one
referring
of the
out.
roles, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, what are some foods that you would recommend limiting? And I don't say avoid because I know it's important, as you mentioned, being realistic and meeting clients where they are. But what are some
Mhm,
foods in particular? I'd love to talk about gluten because I know that this has been a pretty hot topic over the years, and you talked about it in
mhm,
chapter 5. But I've done a lot of research myself on gluten, and it seems that it does have potential to worsen some mental illness for people, especially people who have celiac or gluten sensitivity. But
mhm.
I'd love to hear maybe your thoughts on specifically gluten to start.
Sure. Sure. So I think, with gluten, it's also the source of the gluten as it is with any foods that you're eating. People ask me about dairy all the time, and I'm not opposed to dairy, but I really think the source of the dairy is important. So not getting just regular dairy, but, grass milk dairy is important because I think the quality does differ. So with gluten, it's not that different. It has been found to worsen symptoms of anxiety. So if someone is struggling with anxiety, I wouldn't ask them to give up gluten overnight. I'd ask them to start cutting back on the gluten intake, making some healthy replacements for the gluten that they're eating, depending on where it is in their diet, and then working through the symptoms that they have. This is where food journaling, eliminating something slowly, watching to see how they feel, and potentially coming off it over time can be very helpful. So gluten, I feel uh, it's very much up to the individual what type of, whether someone has a carnivore diet or a vegan diet. I meet them where they're at and I work with them, and I think that that's where someone may really really love gluten and love breads. And so how do we find a way to incorporate these habits in a healthy way? Eat less of it, eat a healthier form of it, find some really better healthy whole grain options to build that in. But then in certain conditions, be really careful because you could be worsening symptoms. So I think that becomes important, whether it's gluten, whether it's dairy, or any other foods that people may feel immediately they have to exclude. Same thing with caffeine or alcohol. It's about the amount, it's how you drink it, where you drink it, when you drink it. With caffeine, it's also, and lastly, what you put into it. So, caffeine, it's, if you get jittery when you drink a cup of caffeine, paying attention to your body and how you're feeling is important. Someone else may be able to have 2 cups of coffee in the morning and be fine. Someone else may not be able to tolerate half a cup. So if that's you and you're struggling with anxiety, then you do have to slowly come off it. Not suddenly, because you can withdraw from caffeine and that can be uncomfortable. And then it also is, are you adding 6 teaspoons of sugar and a quarter cup of creamer, which is essentially a processed food. Is that what you're doing? So ask yourself that as well. And then time of day that you're having it so it doesn't impact your sleep. And similarly with alcohol, in moderation, not when you have a cocktail, if that's what you like, the simple syrup, the added liqueurs, the fruit juice add many more unhealthy ingredients. So if you're going to indulge in a cocktail, have a cleaner cocktail with, a squeeze of a fresh fruit in it and a splash of soda, which is not adding calories compared to a fruit juice. Have it in moderation. If your body reacts to it, have less, or slowly cut it out of your diet. So, it's with all of those things, it's um, those are the sort of the big groups, but then there are the things we know about: junk foods, processed foods, ultra processed foods, trans fats, and added sugars are other things that we obviously want to be careful about.
And the overarching, theories, of course, they're multifactorial in terms of the relationship between some of these specific foods like gluten and dairy. The theories often lead back to, oh, well, they're inflammatory. And as you mentioned, not only just now, but in the book, there's all these different foods that are also anti-inflammatory. And I think your
Mhm.
point about looking at the amount, and if you're also including those anti-inflammatory foods, then maybe you won't have an improper immune response to these foods if your body, your gut health are both in balance, and then you wouldn't maybe
Exactly.
have to worry so much.
Absolutely. And then each person is different. Someone may respond to dairy in a different way from the next person because of their mostly unique microbiome.
Hmm.
And so it again comes back to how that person responds. Can they tolerate it? I might say, sure, have a plain yogurt with some berries and cinnamon, and the person may not be able to tolerate it for whatever reason. So it becomes important to understand that person's microbiome. Maybe some healing of the microbiome needs to occur. Maybe they have to consume other foods which are not uncomfortable for their gut. So it definitely very much comes down to that. They don't necessarily have to exclude it unless there's a condition that they should, such as celiac disease or other allergies or intolerances. Then we have to be a little bit more careful.
Yeah, and then there's the low FODMAP group of foods as well, which
Hmm.
sometimes it's
Hmm.
not necessarily the bread or specific foods like that. And when you mentioned keeping some sort of food record, I always, advise clients to do that versus,
Hmm.
oh, I ate pizza and so it must be dairy. And instead making a list of, okay, I had this food, this was kind of where
Hmm.
my symptoms lay, and then making those connections. Preferably working with a professional, I think is really important to have the
Right.
scientific evidence behind that, and have someone that's
Hmm.
really creating okay, well, were you really stressed that day, or did you have a tough
Right.
week at work, or were you underslept? And when our body in general is susceptible or overstressed, then we're going to be
Hmm.
more likely to react to anything, whether you're
Hmm.
struggle with mental health issues or digestive issues or not.
Hmm. I think all of those factors are important. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. Now, how about nitrates? Now, I get a lot of questions about processed meats, and this
Hmm.
is this is a tough one for people, especially because so many of my clients love how easy it is to just chop up a chicken sausage and add it to a stir fry. Because one of
Sure.
the main things that I work with clients on is getting enough protein. A lot of my
Hmm.
clients are not eating enough protein. So,
Hmm.
what would your thoughts be on processed?
Sure. Yeah, so it depends on the actual processed meat, how it's made, and that type of stuff. But the nitrates actually drive depression. So if someone is struggling with their mood, I think that they want to be careful of that. There are also different types of sausages they could get, right? Because a fresh sausage that's purchased at a meat counter or at a butcher is usually made fresh, and you can easily ask at the meat counter or at the butcher that you go to, do you add any preservatives into your sausage or any other ingredients besides spices? And usually they're quite happy to tell you, and in fact they might even have it on a label. So that's an easy way around that. There are other versions of the same healthy food that you're trying to eat, or same unhealthy food. There might be a healthier version that you can obtain. So when I say unhealthy, I mean the nitrates that could worsen depression. Um, and I think that's one way around it. Another is, I think that, finding other other options for the foods that you like become very important in building up your food list instead of eliminating things and making you feel miserable. So there again, on a one-to-one basis, I might work with someone around the foods that they really like to eat. And then when we circle them and realize, these are not the best options for your current condition, what can we make as healthy swaps? What are the things that we can do that you will enjoy eating, and that will make up for the sandwich that you used to enjoy, or the chicken sausage that you used. There are fresh versions of that are probably pretty healthy and will still bring back the flavor and taste that you're looking for.
Mm. And even to go as far as, the point that you make in the book a lot about the benefit of cooking from home, not just for
Yeah.
a fact that you can control the ingredients and you know what's in your food,
Hmm.
but it's the experience of it as well. And not to say that everybody has a positive at home experience, but creating that relationship with food where it is something that you are preparing and you're sitting down and being mindful, and it can really benefit you health wise from a mental health standpoint, digestive standpoint, if you have, you've cooked the food, you've taken the time and been present with it. I think that's an underlooked aspect of eating in general.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's just about a mindful approach. It's all of those things. So I like that you appreciated it. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Now, anything else that you would add? I think one more thing that I had written down was
Hmm.
soy. It was interesting. You had talked about a research article kind of being inconclusive about its impact on male hormones. And
Hmm.
I work with a lot of females on hormone balance, and
Hmm.
there's plenty of research out there that talks about the benefits of soy and says that it doesn't
Hmm.
impact hormones. And I would just I have personal anecdotal experience from clients where
Hmm.
it sometimes is not supportive of their health goals, and we do end up
Hmm.
having to move to either elimination of it or
Hmm.
choosing more fermented sources of it. So
Right.
very interested to hear your take on that, and it was interesting to read that case study that you put in the book.
Yeah, the I think that again it comes back to my personal philosophy and belief around these nutritional psychiatry plans that I design. I really is that they are highly personalized. I mean, I'm moving toward more and more personalized medicine in all dimensions right now,
Mm,
and for that exact reason, someone might, it depends on the type of soy that they're consuming. I mean, edamame is a great source of protein, plant-based. It's not the same as a more processed tofu. A fermented version like tempeh or miso can be super healthy for the gut. So I think it's what they can tolerate and their particular conditions. So if a person has some difficulties with, say, hormones or the impact, we might want to look at that more specifically, work with their endocrinologist or whoever is also treating them. I believe in a team-based approach because I think that medicine in this country is so highly specialized that we tend to be siloed, and we're so busy that across. I know that we all do our best to communicate, but sometimes you just you don't see the overlapping conditions that could be something the gastroenterologist is treating and something else that you're dealing with from your perspective. So with soy, I think it depends again on the form of soy, what they can tolerate and what their conditions are. If they're struggling with hormones, it might be that they have to slowly eliminate that. But if they're plant-based and that as one of their sources of protein, then we've got to rethink how do we get it. Can they perhaps eat edamame, which is fresh? It's something that is more easily obtained. Can they still include miso paste or some tempeh in their foods or not? And maybe they have to eliminate all of it. So,
mm.
do you tend to eliminate soy off the bat with a lot of your patients?
So we don't typically, it's really, we definitely have a similar approach where if especially if someone is eating plant-based, I'm not going to just tell them to not, I mean, it also depends on their willingness to change and how severe their symptoms are. But
Yeah.
we would first start by choosing, okay, well, maybe we can incorporate more fermented soy and
Hmm.
less of the soy milk and soy yogurt, and go for
Hmm.
more of the fermented kinds. And then if they start to see benefits, which a lot of the times it can be pretty significant and they'll notice pretty quickly within a given month, then we
Hmm.
will completely eliminate it and then maybe even slowly try to reintroduce it back in. And part
Hmm.
of the reason why I do that too is just to show them the direct correlation with their symptoms if that is really the only
Hmm.
variable that we're changing. But I have clients who consume soy and they're fine and they have no issues, they have no digestive
Right.
issues associated with it, and maybe their goals are completely unrelated to gut health, so we don't really have to address soy at all. But it's mostly
Mhm.
my clients who are eating plant-based, where their diets are predominantly soy, or they're eating large amounts of
Mm.
it in one sitting, that it does
Mm.
tend to become a problem. And like you said, it's
Mhm.
very individualized and depends on what the composition of their gut microbiome is, what their hormones look like to
Mhm.
begin with when we start working together.
Mhm.
But it definitely
Mhm.
has shown to be an important area to just keep in mind when I work with clients.
Mhm. And now, I mean, the other options are that we have so many more alternatives now. We have nut-based yogurts. We
Mhm.
have nut-based milks, that people can switch out, and maybe just consume healthier versions of the soy, or less processed version of the soy. So I think I agree with you. It much depends on the person sitting in front of me, and what they need.
Yeah, excellent. So, what would your three takeaways be if someone were listening to this episode and they were thinking,
Mhm.
I think a lot of people, and you could say, well, my mental health could be better. What would your three big takeaways be? I mean, you've already mentioned so many incredible things that people could do today, but what would you recommend right now? What they could do, they could go home tonight and implement?
Sure. So I think it's about small and effective changes. So one thing today, right now, that you could do, that you have at home, maybe it's a spice in your cabinet, maybe it is that you have plain yogurt, or that you have frozen berries that you've ignored in your freezer. What can you do, with what you have at home, and make a healthy switch? Perhaps it's, adding berries to your yogurt, or having berries for dessert tonight. Um, and I think that start there, because these plans are about slow and steady habit change that actually click in,
Mm,
not about saying do these 15 things over 28 days and you'll be cured. And not that I have anything against plans that do that, because they may be actually looking at a completely different set of parameters. But when you're trying to improve your nutrition for mental health, it takes time. And if you have any underlying dysbiosis or imbalance in your gut, that's going to take time as well, and usually at least up to a month. So the first thing is, what can you do, what you have at home that you can institute as a healthy habit? Maybe you have some vegetables that you have been ignoring, and maybe you can add some sides of vegetables to your dinner tonight, or maybe that will be your dinner, and make it in an interesting way with interesting spices. The second thing is to really pay attention to gut foods. So whether they're prebiotics, probiotics, and fermented foods. Probiotics are usually supplements, but can be contained in things like yogurts, like we spoke about. But can you really up your game on those? Can you think about prebiotic foods, which are like the allium family, garlic, onions, chives, many things that we actually cook with, leeks. So, including those just every day, as best you can in your diet, becomes something that, if you almost build it in, it's a healthy habit that's going to make a difference to you. And the third is a very simple one, but I cannot stress it enough, because I do think that, while while I know that Americans, as a country, worry about protein, we are actually much more deficient in the amount of fiber that we're eating.
mm,
And we can only get fiber from plants, fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds, healthy whole grains, legumes, that type of thing. You cannot get it from seafood and animal protein. So I think up your fiber game, by your vegetables, your spinach, your leafy greens, because all of those also bring back really healthy brain nutrients, as well. So I'm not just saying, oh, eat your vegetables and have more salad. There are actual brain healthy nutrients in those simple foods that are going to be good for you. So just three things that you can do. Can you add a salad? Can you up your pre and probiotic game? And can you think of something you have at home? Maybe your mom told you buy some turmeric because she read about it somewhere. If you have it in your cabinet, start using it today. Add a pinch of black pepper. We all have black pepper at home, and see if you can start there, for yourself, because those things will be effective if you can do them today, or maybe the next time you go to the supermarket, or however you get your groceries, that you can change a little bit, tweak a little bit of what you're buying and what you're doing.
Mm. I love that fiber comment as well. I think that is a very underrated, aspect of the diet, and even the recommendations that are out there around like 25 grams. I would even say go a little bit higher, just because of the research that we have on butyrate, which is, provides that fuel for the cells in our gut, which support, as you mentioned, our immune function and the
Mhm.
wall of the
And
colon
our
to
brain health.
protect.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So I think we have
absolutely.
plenty of research to support fiber and all of those
Right. And
steps
it's
that you, yeah.
And it's not that it isn't important, it's just that I know we tend to worry about that a little bit more. But actually, when we do that, we're forgetting that we're not getting our fiber in.
Definitely.
So fiber is our friend. Fiber is your gut friend, and a happy gut is a happy mood. So if you just start including those on a regular basis, your bowel habits will be more regular because you're just naturally consuming more fiber,
Mhm.
as well as your gut microbes will be well taken care of. So I would say, we can all up our fiber game.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, your book is incredible. I can't
Thank
say enough
you.
wonderful things about it. I've
Thank
read
you.
many different books, over my career, and this was really just one that was kind of it's going to be on my bookshelf for the rest of my life, and I'm going to be
Thank you.
telling my clients that they have to read it. And my intern actually read it as a way to kind of just get some education on some of the stuff we're working on, and she had so many notes on it, and she highlighted things and was just speaking to how incredible it was, that she was saying, wow, I never
Great.
knew that,
Thank
and
you.
these associations. So where can people find your book? I have already purchased on Audible and have it on my phone, but where can people purchase it?
Thank you. So they can purchase it actually at all online bookstores now.
Okay.
It's available, since you're in Boston, and it's available at the Harvard Coop, but also at your small local bookstores, and online at Amazon and other locations. So you can find it on my website. We link to the different sites depending on where you want to buy it, and that's umanaidoomd.com. That's UMANAIDOOMD.com. But also, you mentioned your intern being into the work. Follow us on social media, because we're always putting out updated information, new scientific research, research from the book that we share, articles, updates, and things that people could enjoy learning from as well. And that handle is at DRUMANAIDOO, for at Dr. Umanitis. I hope that more people will follow us.
Yeah, This Is Your Brain on Food is the title of the book. That's correct, right?
Yes, this is your brain
Okay.
on food.
This Is Your Brain on Food. Everybody, you need to go get a copy of this. You need to gift it for the holidays to your family members, because this information it cannot go unnoticed in the health and wellness field.
And Aaron, I should mention that we have a huge actual gift giving campaign, because we've been thinking a lot about mental wellness in industry and mental wellness at work,
Mm,
whether it's hospital based employees, whether it's corporations that have employees, because we know that there's been so much more burnout through
mm,
the pandemic, and so much more mental illness, with 11% of Americans considering suicide during the pandemic. So we know that people may not be speaking about how poorly they're feeling. And if people are interested in our gift giving campaign, which is really a book campaign, and in other words, gifting the book to employees who could benefit from it,
mm.
because we want them to fortify their mental health, then please get in touch with us as well. You can
Wow.
send us a DM, you can email our head of marketing on my website, and just send us a message on Instagram, and we'll get back to you.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that resource. I'm definitely going to check that out myself.
Thank
And
you.
the last question is, what is your favorite childhood memory with food?
It's probably watching my grandmother prepare. So I was little, and I would spend some time during the day. My mom was at medical school, and I would spend time with my grandmother, to whom she's one of the people to whom the book is dedicated. And she would, take care of. She'd show me how to prepare lentils, and it's one of my favorite dishes. Dal is one of my favorite go-to staples. And, she would firstly show me how, you need to look at the lentils, appreciate the color, pick out any stones,
Mm.
sort that through on a tray, and then how she would, tenderize them, either pressure cook them or soak them, and how that evolution would go from a little lentil like that into a whole dal, which, otherwise looks like a soup. So that for me is a very beautiful memory of her and what she taught me just in many different things about food and love and nurturance and family. So
Wow, that's beautiful. I think we don't appreciate enough, and I think part of it is, the fast-paced lifestyles, and this is even something that I have really tried to tap back into, but looking at the food and just thinking about, the process of the preparation and learning about each integral part of it and trying to, when it's coming from a restaurant to your plate or, to your doorstep, it can be really difficult to kind of have that full experience when you're not hands-on in the kitchen. But
mhm,
what a beautiful
mhm.
memory. And I hope that people can read your
Oh,
book
thank you.
and maybe try some of the recipes. I love that you had the sardine recipe in there. I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of sardines. I have a recipe on my highlight.
Great source of omega-3s. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And the
Great
cheese.
source of omega-3s for people, easy, inexpensive,
Hmm.
and you don't all, not everyone can get salmon. There are also canned versions of salmon that are healthy. So it's always that you can always find a way towards healthy eating.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you, Dr. Naidu, and for the work that you're doing in the field, and especially because this is such an important topic right now, but for the work that you're doing for the world. I mean, it's incredible, and I can't tell you enough how
thank
much
you.
I appreciate it, and for you coming on and sharing your expertise here today.
Thank you so much, Erin. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, have a wonderful rest of your week.
You too.
All right. Bye.